Hello. Today we are going to be in John chapter 15. So, once again, you can open up your Bible or you can follow along on the screen. So, here in John chapter 15, Jesus is really still speaking to the same group of people that we saw back in John 13. He has his apostles together. He's speaking to them. The time of his arrest is at hand. It's going to happen very soon. So again, going back to chapter 13, these next several chapters are all revolving around those events right before his arrest. He's speaking to his apostles. So we see some interesting things and interesting promises. But again, you always have to keep in context who is speaking and who is he speaking to. So he is speaking specifically at this time to his apostles, but there's certainly some things that we can take away from this as well. So in chapter 15, I'm going to kind of give you a real quick overall point that we're going to focus on. The point of chapter 15 is you better stay with him. You better stay with Jesus Christ. Real quickly, I want to draw your attention to a few things. First of all, notice as he begins this chapter, he says, I am the true vine and my Father is the vine dresser. He is the true vine, and he uses this idea, this concept of the Gospel of John uses this idea of true in a couple of different passages to highlight Jesus as being different from those around him who are not the true version of whatever. Back in John chapter 1, we see in chapter 1 verse 9, it says the true light. So this is John, the Apostle John writing this. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. So John uses this as in contrast to that which is not true light. There's going to be some who maybe claim to be the light, who maybe claim to be something, but Jesus is not simply claiming, he is the true light. So we see him use that expression there. We also see the expression in John chapter 6, verse 32, where Jesus speaks of himself. Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. And Jesus is that true bread. Look at verse 35. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. So again, Jesus is the true light, John chapter 1, verse 9. There's going to be others that pretend to be light, that might seem to be light, but they're not the true light. Jesus, speaking of himself, says, I am the true bread from heaven. There's going to be others that might claim to be this, but Jesus says, I am the true bread from heaven. I am the bread of life. So here again, we're in John chapter 15, verse 1, and Jesus makes this claim once again that I am the true vine. There might appear to be other vines, there might appear to be other sources of life, and essentially it's kind of how I view this. You can't grow a vine, you can't grow a cluster of grapes apart from the vine. You want to have a fruitful grapevine vineyard, you have to have a vine that is true and healthy. I remember back in the day when I was a kid, we used to go around to what we called sucker. You would cut off the base of trees or of grapevines, shoots that would come up, and they're not going to produce fruit. They're suckers. They take the energy of the tree, of the grapevine, but they don't really produce anything. They're not part of the true plant, part of the true vine. Jesus says, I am the true vine. And that's in contrast to others who might claim something. Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me. So notice again this phrase here, in me. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit. So there might be some branches that are in the true vine. They should be bearing fruit. There's no reason for them not to bear fruit, but they're not bearing fruit. And every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he, the vine dresser, the Father, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. So here we have this idea of no fruit. We have this idea of some fruit and more fruit. And we'll notice this again as we go a little bit further in a second. So we have some that are going to bear no fruit. What happens to that? The Father cuts them off. If you can't be in Jesus Christ and not bear fruit. This is a really, they use that phrase where the pavement meets the road, right? The pavement is meeting the road. You can't say you're a part of Jesus Christ and not bear fruit. You can't claim to be a Christian and have no fruits. Jesus says, if you're going to be in me, you're going to bear fruits. You shall know them by their fruits, right? We know these ideas, these verses, these passages. So if you want to be a Christian, and again, Paul is speaking to, I'm sorry, Jesus is speaking to the apostles, but this is a very true statement. Again, he says, every branch in me. And in this, he might even be making this more universal even than just the apostles, right? He uses the phrase, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes. So you have some that he's going to just simply remove. Why? Because they're not bearing fruit. Others that are in him that are bearing some fruit, and the Father's going to prune them. He's going to shape them. He's going to cut them. He's going to push them in a certain direction. And for what purpose? That it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me. So again, every branch in me. Now watch this. Abide in me. This is an imperative verb. This is a verb of command. And so he is commanding these people, his apostles, and I think in this text, even though he's speaking directly to the apostles, I think he is speaking in a more inclusive manner here, because we see the phrase every branch. But he says, abide in me. Here is this command, abide in me. I'm going to highlight this word abide. I want you to see that Jesus hammers this idea here. Abide in me, and I in you. The branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine. So he's speaking, using this illustration from agriculture, right? A vine cannot produce fruit. A branch cannot produce fruit if you cut it away from the vine. And then he says, neither can you. You can't produce fruit apart from me. You can't produce fruit unless you abide in me. I am the vine. Verse 1, I am the true vine. Here he says it again. I am the vine. You are the branches. Whoever abides in me, and again, notice that phrase, right? We saw it back here in verse 2. Every branch in me. Verse 4, abide in me. Again here, whoever abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears. Now look at this. He went from from no fruit to some fruit to more fruit. And now he says here in verse 5, whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. Brothers and sisters, we want to be people that bear fruit. We don't want to just produce, we want to bear much fruit, don't we? We want to bear much fruit for the kingdom. And he says, for apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, and again, I know I'm hammering this, in me, abide in me, in me, in me. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like the branch and withers, right? Up here in verse 2, every branch that does not bear fruit, he prunes. So here again in verse 6, if he does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered and thrown into the fire and burned. Verse 7, if you abide in me, and my words, look at this, abide in me, and my words abide in you. Ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. Now, he's not saying you're going to have Jesus as a genie. We can do a whole class or a whole discussion on prayer and what it means, but he is calling us, he's calling his apostles to remain in him. And again, this might be a little more specific to the promise given to the apostles. It'll be done for you. Verse 8, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit. We saw that idea of much fruit back here in verse 6. It's glorifying to the Father when we bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Here again is another command, another imperative verb, verse 9. Abide in my love. Last time when we did one on John 14, we talked about what does it mean to love. Jesus highlights this idea again here in chapter 15. Loving Jesus means you do what he wants. Chapter 15, verse 10. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. Again, over and over, this concept, abiding in Jesus. He talks about what it means to abide in him. It talks about that if you love him, you're going to stay with him. You're going to do his commandments. He moves on from this to some degree to talk about what does it mean to love. He talks about laying down greater love. Verse 13, has no one than this, than someone lays down his life for his friends. You are my friends, look at verse 14, if you do what I command you. What a thought, what a privilege to be called a friend of Jesus Christ. No longer, he says to his apostles, no longer do I call you servants, but I have called you friends. You are my friends, verse 14. Greater love has no one than this, that he lays down his life for his friends. Verse 15, I have called you friends. Then he says, bear fruit. Go and bear fruit, that your fruit should abide. Now, why is Jesus saying all these things? He then goes on and he tells them, guys, you're going to go through hard times and you're going to go through difficult situations. And again, this might be part of the pruning process, right? To make you a better person, to make you bear more fruit. You might go through some hard times. And in fact, he says, the world will hate you. That doesn't necessarily make you want to become a Christian, does it? Hey, become a Christian so the world can hate you. But the world hated Christ. We're not better than our master, are we? If the world hated Christ, it's going to likewise hate us. If the world is in love with us, we might be doing something wrong as a Christian. He says here, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you because you're part of its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world. Look again at this. I chose you. This is speaking again to the apostles, right? I chose you. Therefore, the world hates you. Remember what I'm telling you. Remember the word that I said to you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you. Some Christians don't believe that Christians are going to be persecuted. Some people living today believe that the gospel, that obedience and faith are a promise to this carefree life. It simply isn't true when you look at the scriptures. He says they're going to persecute you. And again, all of these things are going to be done on account of my name. When we live for Jesus Christ, we're going to go through hardships. The apostles were going to go through hardships. But again, he says, abide in me. Abide in me so that you can bear fruit. And again, all of these things are all focused around the time of Jesus' departure. Back in chapter 14, he tells them, don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't be discouraged. I know I'm telling you I'm leaving, but I'm going to send the helper. And again, he promises the helper here in John 15, verse 26, which is the Holy Spirit. Goes back to chapter 14. Don't be discouraged. Look at chapter 16. We're not into chapter 16 yet, but I want you to see how it fits into the context. Jesus said, I have said all these things to you to keep you from falling away. Guys, abide in me. Abide in me. You're going to go through some persecution. They persecuted me too. Stay with me. Abide with me. Stay in my word. Stay in my love. I'm telling you these things so you don't fall away. Verse 2, they're going to kick you out of the synagogues. But stay with me. Abide in me. We're called today, just as the apostles, he's speaking to the apostles. And some of these things, I believe, again, are specific to the apostles. Some of those promises clearly are. Some of them might be a little more generic and speaking to all of us. Again, going back to that phrase where we saw a moment ago, where he says every branch. But what I want you to see is this truth is still true. We are still Christians that still need to abide in Jesus Christ. We are still Christians that still need to bear fruit. If we're not bearing fruit, there's a problem. And it might just be we go through hardships in this world and in our life so that God can prune us to help us to bear even more fruit. Let's bear fruit this week. Let's be examples to others. Let's abide in Jesus Christ. Let's abide in his words. Let's abide in his love. Let's abide in him this week. Thank you for your attention. You guys have a great day. God bless.